But right now, on that very encouraging note of thinking about grappling with the effects of past defeats, we have GTAA senior class war correspondent Shaun Richman, and he is the author of this book, "Tell the Bosses That We're Coming," and he is also muted.
I will unmute myself. And why am I the expert on past defeats? Is that just like I'm just history's loser here?
Well, I mean, it's certainly what a lot of the book, I think, is grappling with, that the labor movement. I'm going to blow a lot of people's minds here. Not everything has been awesome.
Yeah, definitely true. And we're at a weird moment where, for the first time in almost a century, I think we have a Democratic presidential administration that recognizes that the Democratic Party faces an existential threat if there is not a strong labor movement that can do what a labor movement does, which is a lot of political education, a lot of organizing, a lot of get out the vote. And we might get the PRO Act, which is not nearly good enough, but we might get it. And I'm terrified that we might get it and that we're not ready for what we do in the moment that we get it. When we got the National Labor Relations Act, we basically had 11 years to get whatever we could before they started tamping down on our wins. And we're just not nearly as prepared there, which is one of the reasons that I wrote the book.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this. I should say, by the way, that this could be a deep cut, but this is not the first conversation I've had with Shaun about this. When I was co-hosting the Dead Pundits Society, we recorded like a 2-hour interview about this that, for various reasons, never ended up making it out into the world. Might dig it up now and share it at least with patrons. But in that, we spent probably more time than we're going to be able to spend tonight talking about the history that set up the moment that we're in with this right now. But I do want to talk about that a little bit. Forrest, do you have the Reagan sound?
Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
So one thing that you talk about in your book, and I think it's a really interesting. Like, one of the reasons I was so interested to read the book in the first place is that I think that it's a third way, but in a good way, between a couple of ways that I think that often that radicals talk about and think about, the situation that the labor movement is in right now, which, there's one way that is sort of what I was weaned on as like a baby radical, Trotskyist, which is where you say, okay, there's the big problem with everything is the bureaucracy, basically, like union bureaucracy, basically being too soft and not militant enough. And that if you kind of deal with that, you sort of solve the problem. And then another way is kind of uncritically cheerleading for what the union movement is doing right now, and saying if only we like basically we just need to keep doing more of the same, and we'll be okay.
But harder and faster.
Yeah, exactly.
More.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I want to bring you on, because I think anybody who's seen the show has seen has heard me say many times, and that any path forward for the serious left has to go through rebuilding the labor movement. Without that, without a sort of organized working class at the base, nothing else really gets done, which I think has the virtue of being true. But after you've said it enough times, it sort of starts to feel a little cheap.
Complicated. Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, right. Because
We're not making Jell-O here.
Yeah, because at a certain point, like I think there's a reasonable response, which is, yeah, okay, but are you eventually going to get around to telling us some stuff about how to do that? And I think this gets into the critique that you have in the book, even though it's not really framed primarily in terms of like the bad leadership analysis. That if only you had different leadership, everything would be better. Like mentioned Trotskyism before. There's Leon Trotsky wrote something in the 1930s where he said the crisis of the international working class is ultimately a crisis of leadership. And whereas in this book you have showing, I think that you're about my age. I don't know if everybody gets this reference now. You talk about the Battlestar Galactica TV show in the late 2000s. Talk about like President Rosalind being reluctant to put anyone out the airlock. Because you have so few people left, as a kind of analogy for how to think about certain factional fights in the labor movement. But you do make this critique of the way that we think about how union organizing works, what a unionized workplace even is, how the process works. And I want to set that up. So let's just watch. This is our this is Ronald Reagan eulogizing Walter Reuther.
Walter Reuther was one of the first major labor leaders to advocate that management and labor
Can you guys hear the audio
shift
from
away
it?
from battling over wage and benefit levels to a cooperative effort aimed at sharing in the ownership of the new wealth being produced. He was looking far beyond the next contract. There's a story that Reuther was touring a highly automated Ford assembly plant when someone said, "Walter, you're going to have a hard time collecting dues, union dues, from all these machines." And Reuther simply shot back, "Not as hard a time as you're going to have selling them cars." Reuther was killed in a tragic plane accident in 1970, so he didn't live to see the passage of legislation sponsored by Senator Russell Long of Louisiana that provides incentives for employee stock ownership plans, or as we call them, ESOPs.
Yeah. So that's Reagan talking about Walter Reuther, who of course oversaw all kinds of wonderful militant things to dramatically grow the labor movement and sit down strikes in the 30s and all that, but praising him for ultimately helping to create a system of labor peace.
Same as it ever was, right? Like, Karen Lewis died last week, and people are already like trying to turn her into an MLK whitewashed version of like, no, she was really about this. It's like, no, she was about fighting the bosses. Like, don't try to whitewash this. Like Walter Reuther, Mitt Romney's dad, who was the governor of Michigan, referred to Mitt Romney and then referred to Reuther as the most dangerous man in Detroit. He was dead for more than a decade by the time that Reagan was saying that stuff about him. So that tells you a lot there. I would say that Reuther plays an interesting role in labor. Like I have never met an auto workers activist who did not talk about Reuther and have a possibly apocryphal story about how Reuther told us what to do and we got it wrong. Reuther told us like the auto factories, like the big three, got to build smaller cars, more fuel efficient cars, all this other stuff. That's what happens when you die. And when you were a big threat when you were alive, people like start to create these legends about you. I think Walter Reuther was a great union leader.
Sure, yeah.
I would also say that, you're right in my book. Like, I have no truck for like the union leaders are our problem critique of the labor movement. I actually think that in many ways, John Sweeney, who also died recently, Bruce Rayner, who was kind of a shit to a lot of people, but a lot of these union leaders of the sort of the mid 90s through era were in a lot of respects a lot smarter and a lot more thoughtful about how to proceed than like the heroes of the labor movement, like John L. Lewis, etc. Because good leadership is not really it's not that we lack for good leadership. It's that the full weight of the law has crushed down on us and has been down on us for half a century. And we had 11 good years from the passage of, a little bit before the passage, I would say the passage of the NRA, the Blue Eagle, until Taft-Hartley. We had the full weight of the federal government saying, if the workers want to have a union, you got to respect that. And we had leaders who took as much advantage of it as they could. And then it came to a crashing stop. And because it wasn't, the end of that wasn't a tragedy or a crisis. It wasn't like an immediate thing. It was more this sort of slow decline that it took us so long to recognize it that I think a lot of the left has an interpretation of how to fix labor that is built upon this sort of 1970s Trotskyite interpretation of, we need a more militant rank and file, we need better leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And they couldn't recognize at the time that we're in the middle, we're in the first act of a 4-act open shop drive that is gonna, there's not gonna be as much murder as there was in the previous ones, but it's gonna be pretty vicious.
Yeah.
And one of my frustrations, and my book is frankly, it's a Frankenstein's monster of a book. I'm trying to speak to several audiences at once. I'm a little bit all over the place with it because, when you're writing a book, you're like, maybe this is my only book. I'm going to throw everything at it. But a lot of the sort of
not going to be your only book, by the way. I think that's already.
I think, well, no man has promised tomorrow, so who knows?
Okay. All right.
But a lot of the sort of the left-wing labor strategy, particularly, I think what is called the rank and file strategy based out of the DSA, and I think that it's actually way more nuanced and there's way more facets to it. But I think that it tends to get boiled down to by far too many people as sort of a replay of the 1970s sort of rank and file, get a job at a factory and form an opposition caucus and take over the union. And I don't see it. We all saw how the 1970s ended. It ended with, Ronald Reagan. And a lot of my inspiration when I started writing was Stanley Aronowitz, who wrote a lot of amazing things during that 1970s period, a lot of amazing books. Everybody should read at least one book by Stanley Aronowitz. But, when he actually formed an opposition caucus and took over his union leadership and became, I don't know if he's financial secretary or treasurer or whatever of the Professional Staff Congress, Local 2337 of the AFT, he just felt himself bogged down in the full weight of this legal system that is crushing unions. The duty of fair representation, grievances, arbitration, etc. And his last book, which is amazing. This is the book you actually should read. It's The Death and Life of Great American Unions, or Labor. I might have gotten the name wrong, but just Stanley Aronowitz's book from 2017 or whatever. Read it. He just, I read it. I was still on staff in a well-paid job at the AFT, and it was a totally disturbing book to read because he was putting names to feelings that I had, just things that just weren't working, and I couldn't unread it.
Yeah. So let's